Welcome to episode 49, dear friends. It's been a while because it was Christmas and the new year has started. Today's the 16th of January, and I needed some time off to honestly redesign my thoughts a little bit, to question my purpose, and also to come back with new energy. I was offline for 2 weeks, and that was such a powerful experience because those of you who are following me on Instagram may have seen that I struggled a little bit with finding my self-worth during that time when I wasn't performing. And that is something that I will talk about in one of my future episodes. But I just wanted to share because I know a lot of you are here regularly, and I think being honest about my own struggles is also important. So today's episode is about fear on solo rise. This is a question that came from Patty and from Joe below one of my Instagram posts. And these two comments caught my attention, and I do suspect many of you may recognize yourself in them too. So Patty wrote, female 52, I've been writing for a year now and progress has happened very quickly. I love writing more than any other activity I've ever tried. My challenge is finding the courage and motivation to get out and ride alone. It's very hard to arrange rides with others of the same skill level, dedication, and who share the same energy. I find group rides stressful and distracting, and I have trouble focusing on my skills when I'm not with the right person. Do you have tips for solo rides? And Joe agreed to this and said, this is something I'm also interested in. I fear injuring myself or something going wrong with my bike that I don't have the ability to deal with. Mobile phone signal is often patchy in areas where we can ride. So today I want to address exactly that. So you'll learn why riding alone feels so hard, how you can use self-talk, preparation, and a powerful neuroscience tool to make these solo rides calmer and also safer and actually surprisingly effective. Because fact is, when you ride alone, your brain loses 3 things it quietly relies on. We're going to go into them. And that's not weakness, and it's not being self-sufficient. That's just your brain doing its job, its main job, which is to keep you alive a little bit too well. So if you've ever stood next to your bike and thought, I should ride today, but I'm scared to go out alone, then this episode is definitely for you. Okay, so let's talk about the 3 things I already mentioned. Why does riding alone feel so hard mentally? When you ride alone, your brain loses 3 things we always quietly rely on. The first one is external regulation. It's human to rely on others. So other riders, they regulate your nervous system, and their presence signals you're not alone, someone has your back. This happens subconsciously all the time because humans are just community beings. We are social beings. The second thing that happens is something called attentional anchoring. So when you're riding with, quote unquote, the right person, your focus is guided. So what they do, basically you follow them. And as I said, we're social beings. So when we're with another person, your focus is guided and your attention is guided. Alone, the brain fills that silence with threat scanning, especially if you tend to be a rather fearful person in general. And the third one is you have a change in the perceived safety margin. So when you're alone, you generally feel a little bit more vulnerable. And your brain, especially the amygdala, which is the area in your brain which is responsible for fear, it hates uncertainty. So if there are no witnesses, no immediate help, and if there's like patchy signal, like Joe said, those are all threats. And if you're alone, that threat is amplified. So generally, your brain just loses that external regulation and threats tend to be amplified. So when you're not with other people, as your brain does these things and there are no other people to signal safety, what you need to do is you need to fill the gaps your brain is filling with something that helps you versus something that's driving you more into the fear. And one of the biggest factors of doing this is guiding your self-talk. Because if you don't guide your self-talk, your nervous system will. And that is usually threat-based language. Like, ooh, this is risky. What if something happens? I shouldn't be alone here. This is stupid. Why am I doing this? And as I said, that is very, very normal. It's not weakness. It's just your brain doing its job a little bit too well. So first off, let's look at why self-talk has so much power. Short dive into neuroscience. Your brain reacts to language as if it were reality. So if you have negative self-talk or emotional self-talk, this increases the activity in the amygdala, that's the fear center, as I said. It reduces the activation in our logical and motor learning areas. It narrows your vision and it stiffens movement. So when you're fearful and then you go into negative self-talk, your writing gets worse. And that's not just because you're alone, but because your brain thinks you're unsafe when you're alone. So here's the key. You need to direct your self-talk to regulate your nervous system. But if you do that, it is the game changer. So here's a tool that I use especially. I've used it actually in the last years in my psychological counseling with almost every one of my clients because it is such a game changer. It's called Illeism, and that is talking to yourself in the third person. It's proven that this downregulates your nervous system and really brings your logical system back online because you distance yourself from yourself a little bit. There is so much research about this that talking to yourself in the third person is not crazy. I'm actually going to address this in a future episode because it's such a game changer, because it creates that emotional distance and it creates better self-control. And that's why I'm going to give you examples for that today. So instead of saying, for example, I'm scared of riding alone, you would say, Roxy is feeling scared, but she knows what to do. Or Roxy is feeling scared. She feels that she is getting sweaty palms and her heart rate is rising. And that's okay. So you state the feelings that you have and then you validate them. So it's absolutely okay what you're feeling because this is what matters. One, name it to tame it. So by just naming the feeling, you help your nervous system to regulate. So that's the first step, name it to tame it. For example, Roxy's feeling nervous, Roxy's feeling scared. And the second one is validating this feeling gives you the sense of safety. So then you know, okay, it's okay what I'm feeling. Because the problem is usually when we feel scared and we know that actually there's no reason to feel scared, we tend to judge ourselves and say, oh, don't be scared, don't be nervous, there's nothing about this. But you're still feeling nervous, right? So it's not going to help if you're not validating your feelings, those feelings are just going to get louder and louder and louder until you validate them. And that's why you're doing that shortcut by saying, okay, Roxy's feeling nervous and it's okay. So you're validating yourself. And by talking to yourself in the third person, you're creating that emotional distance to allow the amygdala to downregulate and your logical system to come back online. That small shift really does something super, super powerful. As I said, it activates the prefrontal cortex where your logical mind is. It reduces the emotional reactivity and it increases your clarity and your problem solving because you feel heard, you feel validated, and you feel guided. So it's just like you had the right person with you. So in other words, your brain switches from that panic mode to like a self-coaching mode. And this is especially effective when you're alone because there is no external voice to regulate you. So here's a very specific example of how you could use Illeism on a solo ride. It works best when it's calm and it's factual and it's instructional. So not like over motivational and not super dramatic. Instead of, I'm scared right now, you could say, Roxy's cautious. She's riding within her limits. Instead of, I hope this goes well, Roxy will modulate the brake. She's concentrating on breathing. She's looking ahead. So you see what I'm doing here? I'm giving myself clear instruction if I notice that my fear mode is kicking in again. A step ahead of that could be, for example, I'm saying, I hope this goes well. Roxy's feeling fear. That's okay. Roxy will focus on braking early, modulating the brakes, and breathing and looking ahead. So giving myself first that validation, name it to tame it, validating it, and then giving myself a simple cue to follow. This kind of self-talk really reduces fear without suppressing it. So you're not lying to yourself, you're coaching yourself, and you're there for yourself. You have this strong inner team. Often solo rides fail if you don't have a structure, because solo riding isn't just riding without people, it's actually a different skill. If you ride alone with no plan, some brains will default to threat scanning. So you look at threats on the trail, you'll then look at how your body tenses. When your body tenses, you look at even more threats, and you'll get in that negative spiral. And that's why you need to have a clear focus or task on your solo rides in order to really be able to focus on what the goal is, because then you can focus on reaching the goal, which will then, of course, motivate you in the long run. So let me give you an example with the two challenges of the ladies who wrote below my Instagram post. So if we look at Patty's challenge, who is lacking the courage to go out alone, although she actually knows that it could help, it's not courage that is actually the problem. It's usually the unstructured attention. So if you go out and you don't have a clear task to focus on, then you need to set a clearer task, because that task is going to, or finishing that task is going to motivate you in the long run. So for example, you could decide before the ride, this ride is only about one thing. For example, today I'm only going to focus on modulating my brakes well, or I'm going to focus on braking mainly before the corner, or I'm going to focus on noticing when my arms tense up too much, or when my vision is too focused on the negative. Or what I like to do, because it's not dangerous, but it's absolutely amazing, is today I'm going to challenge myself uphill. So I'm going to try that one section that I've never cleared 3 or 4 times. Or I'm going to stay exactly within my heart zone. Or for example, what I like to do is also interval training, because I can't do that with others. And then I stay really focused on myself and reaching my task. And then if you notice during the ride that your focus is wandering off, you can use Illeism, that talking in the third person, to, for example, Patty's feeling distracted, she's feeling scared, she doesn't know what's coming, then Patty is now focusing on smooth braking. That's the only job today. Your brain will love this, because dopamine is linked to task completion, not to the performance per se, and not to bravery. So finishing the task, even if it's just on a short ride, is going to lead to confidence growing quietly, but actually reliably. Let's look at Joe's challenge next. So Joe said that she's scared of injuring herself and has that typical what if scenario. What if I crash and no one knows? What if something happens and there's no cell coverage? And that is actually very rational fear. So again, it's important not to argue with it. It's important to design around it, because fear grows with unknowns, which is okay because it's very smart. So it's about, for one thing, reducing uncertainty and validating your feelings, not just pushing courage blindly. So you need to practice and plan for uncertainty. So if, for example, you say, oh, what if something happens to my bike and I can't fix it? Well, you could plan for that by learning how to fix specific things on your bike, which I would encourage every woman and every man out there to do. But often it's, I have to admit, women who don't want to, or just don't have the background and then don't do these things. Please, ladies, know how to fix the basic things on your bike. It's really going to help you with confidence. And also, if something really breaks down, if you stay somewhere close, what's the worst thing you can happen? You can walk back, right? The other day I had a flat tire, and the spare tube that I had was also flat, and my tubeless repair said it didn't work, so I had to walk back. Yes, it was not nice. I walked 45 minutes and I had a huge blister afterwards on my foot, but it wasn't the end of the world, right? So that's something that I know, okay, even if that happens, I will survive. I'm just going to walk back. So as I said, it's validating yourself for the feeling, designing around it, upping your skills, especially also bike maintenance wise, and then practicing and planning for it. And if you get scared in that situation, if it's really overwhelming, use Illeism. I can guarantee you it is the game changer when you're in that highly emotional state, to talk to yourself in the third person, validate your feelings, name it to tame it, and then giving yourself a clear next task, which is just the next clear step that you need to do. Okay, next I want to give you some practical solo safety systems. That is step number 1, use familiar terrain. So start with a same loop, start with a small loop, something that is predictable, because you just need to get used to going out alone in the first place. And predictability always calms the nervous system. Number 2, this is what I do every time, is I share my location. So I put WhatsApp and send my location and say share for 8 hours and share it to my husband. And you can do that with anyone you trust. Send a message like, hey, heading out for a short ride, location shared, and I'll check when I'm back. And your brain immediately relaxes because it knows, okay, there's someone who's got my back. Of course, you need to trust that person. Number three is that you need to prepare. So you need to take the tools, you need to have water, you need to have an extra bar, you need how to repair, at least some basic repairs. And then you can say, hey, I'm prepared. And worst case, I can always walk back, because walking is not a failure. It's just an option. And any option you give your brain in such a situation is going to help calm your nervous system. And the last one, and that is a biggie, is ride at 70%. So solo rides shouldn't be limit tests. Of course, you can do interval training on uphills, but on downhills, it's not a limit test, right at 70%. However, lower intensity also means that you have better perception. You have more learning going on because you can actually focus on what you're doing and focus on how to correct it. And you can practice the self-talk, because that is going to transfer to many, many things in life. And if you're in that 70% happy zone, then you can really focus on, how can I make this ride today for me into a growth ride? How can I profit from it on many levels? Overall, I can say, when done right, solo rides really become very regulating, and they are the progress enhancers, because you learn to guide your attention, you learn to coach yourself under hopefully mild stress, and you learn to trust your decisions. And this carries over to everything, to group rides, to harder terrain, and of course to real life. So if riding alone feels hard, it's not because you're weak. It's because you're leaving your comfort zone. And leaving that and something you perceive as safe is, of course, it's hard. But you're giving up that ability to rely on others to replace it with something much more powerful, the ability to rely on yourself. And you're practicing something that is way more important than just riding. You are practicing how to overcome fear of new things. You are practicing how to use self-talk intentionally. And you're practicing how to use Illeism, so the way to talk to yourself to regulate high emotional states. And that is a big, big, big step. So just start small, short rides, familiar rides, one focus at a time, and end it with the same positive, empowering self-talk. So at the end of the talk, at the end of the ride, you really need to say, okay, I showed up for myself. I safely expanded my comfort zone. Task completed. That last sentence is crucial, because your brain learns from how you end experiences. So it's really important to, at the end, give yourself that gratitude. Give yourself that one more, hey, you did really well today. That is how confidence is built. So it's not the big things you do sometimes, it's the small things you do regularly that shape who you are, and that's precisely how confidence is built. So thank you for sticking with me till the end. That's all I have for you today. If you like this podcast, become a patron or buy me a coffee. The links are below, and I hope to see you again for my next episode. Goodbye.